No, not that I can tell. He's just not muted, and I've got my water, and we're live. Cool.
Fantastic.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Blue.
How are things going?
Things are going well. I think we should probably start off by saying welcome to was it the third episode
Yes, I
of
believe.
of, of ballads between ballads and history?
Yeah, our much overdue third episode.
Yeah, we we apologize to those in the chat that have been looking forward to this third episode. We know we've kind of dragged the suspense out on this, so hopefully you're there with us. We have a really exciting episode for you here today. Uh, and as an apology for us not being as on top of this as we would have liked to be, I have a cool reveal for one of my upcoming projects that is pertinent to what we're talking about today.
All right, cool. Poland's still not back with us, but that's okay. That's okay. We'll live.
That's okay. That's all right. We'll do that reveal at the end of the stream. We can make sure that there are people here. But I guess we can start off with introductions. I am your one of the triumvirate of co-hosts here with uh, Michael Odin. I am the Arthurian Nut, and I currently have Elysian Fields on Indiegogo 5 days with, I think 4 or 5 days left on the campaign. So be sure you get in on that. But we are going to be talking about the Knights of the Round Table today. So yes. I will let Blue introduce himself, and then eventually Poland's going to join us. He is on an important phone call, and we'll be hopping in when he can.
Mm-hmm. All right, I go by Blue Samurai Zero. A lot of people call me Blue. It's also cool, perfectly fine to call me Zero. A few people have done that, and I actually hear it and respond most of the time. So Poland is like our Arthurian Nut here. They're both history majors. I think Poland has finished his degree. Michael's about to, and or Mike is about to. Sorry, Michael is that Australian guy. You're Mike, I guess. I don't know.
No, I'm just call for this purpose. We'll just go with Odin, because I go by Michael too. So
okay, so Michael too is Odin is about to finish his degree, I think, and he's when. The idea for this was actually birthed out of a conversation Poland and I were having after opening our mail one day online. And, God, that sounds thrilling, but it was all comic books. So that was before. Anyway, we got into a whole bunch of history stuff and a few people liked it. So it was like, let's just keep doing this. And here we are. So we decided to pick a story that's, out of somewhere, just pick an old story and look at what was going on in the world historically around it, as well as the history of the development of the story. And then we wanted Michael in on that, and Poland and I did, because they both know history better than I do. And there's another guy, Shane Burgess, if I'm saying his name right. He really liked this idea too, so I thought, why not? We got one guy in the audience sometimes, so that's cool. And I enjoy these.
One person, you're the best.
I enjoy these. As far as I can tell, these guys enjoy these. And I am the one who's the most ignorant. Like, I have had some history, but I'm not as fluent with it. And I know we're kind of touching right now today with getting into the Knights of the Round Table. And when a lot of that came out, we're looking at the 1100s. So I'm aware from my church history that this is about the time of the Protestant Reformation. And I don't know if that cultural shift is going to influence things. That's what these guys are here to tell us. There's my little preview. And Poland's still on the phone.
Yeah, and so Poland's still on the phone, so he can when he decides it's time to chime in, he can go on ahead and introduce himself. But let's get this party started. What do you say, Blue?
Yeah. Okay, Knights of the Round Table. Why? When I said we're picking up at 1136 or 1137, whatever it was, did you go right to the Knights of the Round Table for that?
Because that's really when you started to see things like the post-Vulgate saga come.
Post-Vulgate.
And Arthur, we spent a good deal of time talking about the establishment of Arthur and his story on the last thing, but the Arthurian myth is so much larger than just Arthur, and the heart of those stories are the stories of his knights. Arthur goes off and does his adventuring every now and again too. But the thing about Camelot was that it was safeguarded by these elite knights that were bound by their pacts of chivalry in Arthurian court.
Hmm.
Um, and so the next organic place to go, and we're talking about this, is the knights. And so, the first real appearances of these knights and the round table and everything come about in that 11 that the 12th century time period in the 1100s. So what we'll do is we'll first kind of talk about the round table, because the round table is what everyone kind of associates with the knights, and then we'll start talking about the knights, starting to talk about like when the knights came in, like what kind of themes that we saw in those stories, and really talk about kind of like the upbringing of the post-Vulgate saga. And then you can't talk about the Knights of the Round Table without talking about their greatest quest in entirety of Arthurian lore, the Holy Grail.
All right. Now, when you say post-Vulgate, what I hear is that when I hear Vulgate, I'm thinking of a particular Latin translation of the Bible.
Yeah. So it's I'm blanking on why it is. I don't know really why it's called post-Vulgate. It was the post-Vulgate saga was written anonymously between 1230 and 1235. And it's the thing where we kind of get it's where we really get the Holy Grail.
Okay.
That's like and everything kind of leads up to that. Is you've got all of these French and English writers and poets who are telling these stories of Arthur and his knights, and then the post-Vulgate saga kind of comes in and takes little bits from all of those stories and gives them a climax in the quest of the Holy Grail. And so we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the round table.
Okay.
So the round table in and of itself, everyone is familiar, a giant circular table where all of Arthur's knights sat at and would discuss their quests and enjoy meals with one another. It was effectively the centerpiece to Arthur's court at Camelot. And so the first appearance of this appeared in Wace's Roman de Brut, which was a Norman language adaptation of Geoffrey's Historia, which we mentioned in the last video, finished in 1155.
Okay.
In that version, Wace had effectively said that Arthur created this round table to bring his barons together, the knights, and allow them to prevent quarrels among themselves and like kind of hash stuff out around the round table. But as things kind of progress, this table kind of gets romanticized, and then you start to really see the knights come to the forefront as characters.
People just start adding to the mythology.
Exactly. I have a list pulled up from Wikipedia right now of all the knights that are associated with the round table and everything, and you're looking at close to 30 people, right? And so guys, as an Arthurian guy, I've read a lot, but even some of these guys, I'm trying to remember my own self of where they have appeared and what have you, and what stories. And
number 21 is Yvonne the Bastard.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's a lot. There's just a lot of these guys that are there, and that was the whole thing, is that eventually the knights became the way that, you know, these French and English writers could make their imprint on the myth, because you can't touch King Arthur,
Uh,
but you can make a knight.
or at least
And
after a certain point in time, you can't touch Arthur anymore.
exactly, like Arthur has been established, especially the core myth of Arthur has been so ingrained that the way that you expand upon it is, well, who are, know that Arthur commanded an elite group of soldiers, so here comes the Knights of the Round Table. And so the Knights of the Round Table were, kind of they were the elite knights in Arthur's kingdom. That any knight could become a member of the Round Table. Like, you had to distinguish yourself through tournaments, through acts of valor, grabbing the king's attention and everything. And all of you guys were bound. All of them were bound by this code of the Round Table, this code of chivalry.
Mhm.
To, there have been so many different variations, but effectively it was like, uh, protect the innocent, like standard heroic shit. It was like,
Okay.
you will not deal in lies. You will be honest. You will have integrity. You will give mercy to those that ask for it. Like stuff like that. It was just this giant code, and you'll see all these different variations of it.
It's all the stuff that upholds our aggressive and warlike tendencies as guys, but also tempers them with morality and ethics at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It,
it's all that.
it speaks to the romanticism of the time period. Like, it's really funny, because like little boys and everything like that are the ones that go and read these books of Arthur now. But when these things were being commissioned, they were effectively like the trashy romance books of the day, because they were all being commissioned by wealthy noblewomen. These
Oh,
wealthy noblewomen were the ones commissioning these scribes to go out and compile these things of Arthur, because it was the fantasy of, underneath every with every story of a knight when they're going on their adventure, they always have like some romantic affiliation with a girl, and they, the knights sweep these girls off their feet. They're with the person because of love and everything like that. And you're talking about a time period where marriage and everything like that was an economic transfer.
uh,
It was, yes, you are being married off to X count so that we can get acres of land and some more people in our army that we
oh, and a woman was greatly admired if she had huge tracts of land. Yeah.
yes, immense tracts of land, of course.
So if I've got this straight, essentially, all the stories now that are save the world, get the girl, that comes out of a tradition that starts with the noble women commissioning these kinds of stories about heroic men,
Yeah.
and now and nowadays that's being ridiculed as men being in some way overbearing. I forget all the words they use for it. Hey,
It's a load of shit, is what it is. Like I don't even want to touch this whole fucking nonsense about, oh well, this is just toxic masculinity. It's like, actually, you guys are the ones that fucking put this out there. Like dudes, whenever you had like a nobleman hire a poet to write a song, it was about themselves. It was to fucking amp up something cool that they did.
yeah,
Women would straight up pay for these these poets and scribes to write these romantic stories that could provide escapism from what their day-to-day life was.
because
And so it's like the birth the classical romance of things like Robin Hood and things like Arthur and everything like that are a direct result of effectively housewives.
Mm-hmm.
It's like going into in that way, trashy romance novels are literally just the latest step in what started in these romantic in these pieces.
I
Like
mean, meanwhile, action adventure movies, the other piece to that, we get ripped on for nowadays.
it's just like oh well, he's just such a he's just oozing in bravado and it's so toxic. It's like
Jeez.
first of all, not to step on any shoes here, but did somebody freaking like screw you over in a relationship once? Because like these are the kinds of people that you guys get with like all the time.
Mhm.
A, B, you're the fucking people that created this.
Yeah.
Like this was your market. You freaking went and paid people to make stories like this.
Yeah.
Way back when. Like that was the whole thing with it.
Bored noble women, desperate
Yeah,
housewives. Yeah.
that's effectively what it was. It was like, well, my life is literally just getting plowed into to provide heirs and making sure that everything looks pretty and ordering slave girls around. Well, you know what? Fine. I will hire the local poet to make a story that I can just escape it. That's how all this shit happened. Like most of these fucking stories were patroned by wealthy noblewomen who wished life was a little bit sunnier.
Yeah. And Dean, nerd is the word, is facetiously saying, "You have facts. Get him."
Yeah, I saw. I don't think I've ever actually been on Dean's stream, but I've seen a few of his videos. They're pretty fun.
They are. So I have now. This is a more serious question, which may go nowhere. I mean, I could be asking a question that doesn't matter. It doesn't relate. Okay, that'll be a good answer. I know around this time the Crusades were starting, and so
Yes.
if I recall correctly, the very first, I mean, the Crusades get a really bad name for good reason, but the very
Of
first
course.
Crusades were started because of Middle Easterners invading through Turkey, or modern day Turkey, and whatever else is around there, Eastern Europe, and so a cry for help against the invaders went from Eastern Europe westward, and then the initial Crusades were to go defend Eastern Europe from the Middle East.
I mean, like yes and no.
Okay.
Because the whole thing was is that the Western Church didn't give a shit that the Eastern Church was under invasion. They didn't care until like the last crusade when it was very clear that the Ottomans were about to shit stomp the Byzantines. Effectively it was the Eastern Church was like, hey, we're getting overrun, and the church didn't care, and then it was we've lost Jerusalem, and then all of a sudden it was, oh, well, that just won't do. And so it was to liberate the whole land from the infidel. Because that was the first crusade, was the French over the French led by what is his name?
Charles
Poland. Why aren't you off the phone yet? This is your area. I am here for the literature side of things. This is not fair. Anyways, you had there was obviously more than just the French, but like the big leaders of it were French, and they went to the Holy Land and liberated Jerusalem from the Saracens.
Liberated like Berlin. Yeah, liberated like Berlin was after World War II.
Yeah, like in a bloodbath where they just fucking massacred everyone. So, and then the Second Crusades, you had Saladin retaking Jerusalem. It was like the Crusades were, that was like the whole thing, and then by the time it gets like the Third Crusade and everything, yeah, they're trying to take back Jerusalem, but now they're also trying to stem off the tide in Byzantium and everything like that. Well, I guess it's Constantinople. I don't know what. I like the term Byzantium way more than Constantinople.
Oh yeah. When you say
but
Byzantium, I don't get old jokey songs in my head. So
yeah,
we'll go with that.
I'm not a fan of that song either. But point is that they didn't really become concerned with the infidel encroaching. And I'm using that not because that's how I see Islam, but because that is the terminology that they would have used.
Yes.
That the idea would be is they didn't see the encroaching threat of Islam on the Christian world until pretty much the Ottomans had freaking taken down Constantinople, and we're putting up Istanbul.
Mm-hmm.
And so by that point, they launched a crusade, but they got their fucking asses kicked.
So hello Shane. Good day. Where I'm kind of curious about this is, so you got fantasizing housewives of noblemen in the far west, in France and England, and then we've got and I don't know all the dates of the Crusades accurately, so that's part of the shakiness of my question, or of trying to connect. You can correct it. So then we've got actual military things going on, sort of feeding the knights motif in the culture. How do these come up at all?
Yeah, to realize that especially by the second and third crusade, these notions of chivalry and the stories of Arthur have become ingrained across not even just France and England, but the entirety of Europe. They caught on very quickly. And so you had these people that were trying to emulate these Arthurian archetypes established by their knights to justify what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's oh, well, you have to do this, that, the other. And it's really funny because you had these big names were, of course, doing this on their own personal level, but they weren't holding their men accountable to that same standard, which is why you had awful atrocities happening in places like Acre. And but
and maybe why the retaking of Jerusalem was such a bloodbath.
It's it. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is a war. There's a fantastic book by Tim O'Brien called "The Things They Carry," and one of the chapters in it is how to write a true war story. And his whole thing is talking about how when you're talking about war, there has to be a mix between the romantic side about it and the ugly side, because war can be very pretty, but it's also very ugly. And so balancing those two things, and in that crusade era, and when you're talking about Arthur and everything, everybody just wants to talk about the pretty side, the fancy armor, the sporting of between opponents, and respect of foes, and you have villains and this, that, the other, but the truth is not quite so concrete. Right. And at the end of the day, these are what they are. They're romantic stories that are escape from the true reality. But you had all of these people evoking the chivalry of Christendom, which all stems back to that Arthurian myth, that this idea of the chivalric code that was beholden to these Knights of the Round Table, and so you had prominent figures who would be claiming to uphold these things, because you want to be the hero. But the fact of the matter is that it's just a fucking war. It's the same thing as anything else. And there's beauty in it, and there's ugliness in it. And yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm glad I let you roll there instead of interrupting you to ask, because you answered the question. It is weird to talk about war and say, well, it's also pretty. Well, I wonder which aspects he means by pretty. You know,
Like the way that O'Brien, because Tim O'Brien fought in the Vietnam War,
okay.
and so the way that he had described it is like, when a flare goes up and lights up the area, it's gorgeous. You've and the the flashing lights of gunfire, the uniforms, everything. There's a prettiness to it, but then there's also the ugly side. You have people dying all around you. There's a it's this mixture of things. There's intense moments and there's beautiful moments. There's you know not every second of a war is being fought. It's people developing friendships and brotherhoods that'll last lifetimes over. And so there's a beauty there, but at the same time, you know, you forge these brotherhoods, and then you go into a conflict, and some of those people don't come home,
Mm-hmm.
and there's the ugliness to it. And it's a very interesting thing, and this goes back even to back then. As you, they, I feel like when you're looking at especially medieval era, all of these, every single person wanted to focus on the pretty aspects of, because especially back then you have the nobility had these beautiful sets of armors.
Were they functional in battle?
Some of them, yeah. And it would all depend. Like you're not going to wear a non-functional set of armor into battle. And the big thing that we also have to realize is, so the stuff that you see in movies like Excalibur and that we've kind of romanticized, those weren't really used on the battlefield. Those were used in like jousting tourneys, right? Where you wanted to have as much armor possible so that when you got hit by that freaking lance, you didn't die. like that's actively the
I saw
whole
some
point.
stuff on jousting once, and it's got all this special things so you don't take the joust, ricochet off your shield up into your neck, or things like that.
Exactly.
It's more specialized.
Yeah. Exactly. So like the majority of those super heavy sets, no, they weren't really worn into battle. You did have heavy cavalry units that would have similar sets where it's like the same thing. They're effectively the medieval version of the tank. Like you literally just you put a shit ton of armor on them, gave them a giant fucking stick,
mm-hmm.
and sent them into a battlefield to just mess people up. But that was like the downside of heavy cavalry, is that you could only really use them for one really big push, because once they get into the fray, they don't really have mobility.
Yeah.
And that's why you kind of try to use light cavalry to probe at the heavy infantry, the infantry units. And so that way, when your heavy cavalry does their charge, they've been weakened to the point where that charge is fucking just massacre level.
Right.
And so I see that they're talking about the tree stump.
Well, everything in its own time. I didn't want to cut that off. But anyway, but war is both pretty and hellacious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
So the pageantry is what attracts people. And I always wonder before we move on to the tree stump, I hear the term romantic, and I think of romantic in the sense of, well, from when I especially solidified the definition from when I studied fascism, of all things, because that was an attempt to return to romanticism. But romanticism being the fantasy of the rustic idyllic life, not ideal life, but idyllic, countryside living, very close to nature, being always pure and never difficult.
No, 100%. And like that was like, you look at these stories and there's a lot of mixture between, you have all these like Christian ideas and everything, Christian symbolism, but there's also a lot of pagan stuff mixed in there as well. When you're looking at things like the Lady of the Lake and everything, and they're all branches of the Fae, and magic plays a big role in Arthurian lore, which is a big no-no to like old school Christianity.
Yeah.
And again, that goes back into returning to that rustic, ideology of like the farm side, because that's where those things were held so close. Is that a lot of people don't realize this. Even when you had the Roman Empire, when they initially put in Christianity as the religion of the empire, people still practiced their old traditions.
Uh-huh.
And that actually caused a lot of problems with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church tried to stomp that out a few times.
Eventually, yeah.
But local traditions and local lore held prominence, because that was the way that Rome had always been before, is that you had the religion of the empire, which you adhered to, but then you could practice your own faith as well, so long as you acknowledged the religion of Rome. And so, like, when you're looking at these Arthurian stories, there's still that thing. They're Christian knights, but they exist in a world where these other traditions and these other folklores and beliefs exist as well.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the most well-known stories of Arthurian lore is Gawain and the Green Knight.
Okay.
Right? That entire story is based in like Celtic mythology almost, right? The only Christian element to it is Gawain, but everything down, you have the Green Knight himself, who's kind of a Celtic folklore thing. He's I'm blanking on the creature's name, but there is a creature in Celtic mythology that is
like an elemental. I always heard it called the Green Man, not to be the Green Knight, but
it's he, and like in the mythology, he isn't necessarily green, but he's an omen of death, and he rides around on a horse, and he has no head.
Okay.
And so like the way that the Green Knight works in the story is very similar to that creature in Welsh mythology. But then you even go into like, the woman that Gawain marries, I'm blanking on her name, where she was cursed to only appear as her true self at night, but during the daytime, she would appear as an old hag. And so
sort of the basis for Shrek.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, because this goes again into that whole thing where the people that were primarily writing having these things commissioned were these wealthy noblewomen, because how that story ends up is Gawain is supposed to marry this woman, and he's not too thrilled, but she comes out on their wedding night, and he's only seen her as a hag, and she's just fucking this gorgeous woman. And she's like, how would you have me? Like, would you have me like this, like all the time? Like it, and he answers like, which would you prefer? And that breaks the curse somehow. And so it's like, it's very funny just to kind of tie that back to it.
That's the best answer to the "do these genes make me look fat?" is, because if he says I'd rather have you old, then that it's kind of weird. If I'd rather have you young, then it's you don't value me because I'm going to get old anyway. And,
it was about like what time of the day would she was going to have to be a hag during some point of it. It was which time of the day would he like her to be pretty, and which time of the day would she like her to be ugly? And he allows her the choice, and that breaks the curse. Okay. I just go, oh, okay.
We've wandered a bit. So this had to do with, God, where were we?
This all kind of ties into it. We are officially joined by Poland. Poland, how
Yeah,
about you give us your
Poland.
introduction here, buddy?
What year was the first crusade from France, and who led it? More importantly,
Yeah.
or just the first crusade, which may have been from France.
1096.
Okay, 8 A.D.
Correct.
Not me.
Yeah, I cannot remember the king of France's name at that time.
It wasn't
I
Philip.
don't think it was the king. I think that it was somebody high up, but he was a baron, I thought. Because I think the king during that time, wasn't that Charlemagne?
I think it was after Charlemagne.
Hold on.
All right, now, and I'm trying to remember, just so we can make sure we tie off loose ends. How did we get, before we go to the stump, how did we get on the thing I was asking, and what was I asking?
All right, so you would asked about how these stories of the knights could have affected the mentality going into the Crusades.
Yeah, and if they did or didn't, yeah. And then
Yeah, and I
there
very,
into,
very much so.
and then there was a lot of mixing of Christendom and the leftover pagan things. Because you had kept saying romanticized, and I mentioned how I've always heard that word, and then you gave an example of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and I wanted to make sure I didn't cut off your point.
The answer is Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Louvain.
Yeah, Godfrey's one of the more notable ones I was just about to say. And from Southern France,
he was the person that took Jerusalem the first time in the first crusade.
Raymond IV of Toulouse from Southern France, Robert II of Normandy.
Yeah. But anyways, so going back to the Knights of the Round Table.
And I found the headless thing is called a Dullahan?
Yeah, Delane.
Delane, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, like it's very interesting stuff. So like when very vague in my description there. But back to the Knights of the Round Table is, you start to really see them appear around the 12th century. And they kind of take over the Arthurian myth. Like you have things like, we talked about Le Morte d'Arthur on the first episode and everything. And that's where you really get Lancelot comes in as the French piece of propaganda that he is. And in all honesty, you actually had like a lot of that, because it's very funny, because when you look at the stories of Arthurian myth, there are more French writers of these stories early on than there are English.
Even though they're cousins, really.
Well, like the interesting thing is that we also have to remember that at this point in time, the military superpower on the mainland, like they were the ones with the most knights. I think my screen is. Am I freezing up a lot?
Oh yeah, you jitter here or there, but then we hear it and you kind of catch up, and your video kind of catches up. So I think you said the biggest superpower militarily at the time was France. Yes.
Yes, correct. I'm going to stop my cam, and hopefully that helps things. Sometimes the Wi-Fi goes wonky around here.
Okay.
So enjoy my beautiful cover of my book, people. Anyways, but point is so we have this whole time period where the French are kind of that cultural and military superpower. England's kind of catching up a little bit around that time. Let's see what's going on in England at that time. I want to say that's around the time of the Danish invasions.
Poland, do you remember when those were? You are Google, aren't you?
I'm looking it up at this point too. 1069 to 1070. So yeah, like around this time, England is recovering from the Danish invasions of England. And so yeah, no, like they're starting to come up, but like the big superpower is France, and yeah, they really liked those Arthurian stories, and they started to kind of bring some of their own twists into them. And then we get into post-Vulgate. Poland, is there anything that you want to address based off of the vast multitude of shit that
I was gonna say that I think if you consider in the 12th century you had 3 different crusades, originating from Europe. I think that's where you begin to, maybe you guys already discussed this, but that's where you begin to get the elements inserted into the Arthurian legend, like the Holy Grail, claiming these artifacts, right? And also the way a lot of the artwork began to be portrayed in Arthurian legend began to take on that Crusader aesthetic. So the tabards with the crosses, as well as the 12th century period armor, as opposed to 8th century armor, when perhaps what actually originated.
We hadn't talked about any of that, so
we're glad
that. I said, and this is why you're here, Poland.
Oh,
I'm glad I could contribute, despite my tardiness. But yeah, that's another point that I would say is that it definitely became a reflection of that time period, and it's interesting to me because I think we still have. It's like it kind of got frozen there. I mean, in the Victorian era, as we'll probably discuss in the future, there were some more elements added to it. But I think in terms of aesthetics and these religious aspects that come into it, especially the Christian ones, I think the Crusader era is the most responsible for it because the 3 most well-known Crusades, 1 through 3, all were during this time period.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point that I hadn't even thought of. But yeah, post-Vulgate happens around 1230, 1235, which is around the time of the Third Crusade.
Post-Vulgate, if I remember correctly from the beginning of the show, because that was so long ago, is just a name given to a particular version of the Arthurian legends, or is it
post-Vulgate cycle is the name given to the version of Arthur that establishes the Holy Grail.
Okay.
And is really kind of the climax of the story of the Knights of the Round Table, because the quest for the Holy Grail is where a lot of these guys died. And when you're building effectively what post-Vulgate does is it creates the atmosphere for the fall of Arthur. All these knights go off to try and get the Grail, and most of them don't come back. You have people who come close and almost get it, and they come back empty-handed. I think the person that gets the Grail, it depends on which version. I can't remember what post-Vulgate has it as. I want to say it's Percival, but I know that it was either like in most versions it's either Percival or Galahad that gets it, because those are the two of Arthur's most pure knights. But that's where you really get this post-Vulgate cycle is during that time period where you have the Crusades have been going on. And I don't, Poland brings out, that's a fantastic point. I don't think that's coincidence at all. I very much think that, these stories, as much as they are, this escapism that was, as we had talked about, established by wealthy noblewomen, they became so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And even by that point, because everyone was toting, oh yes, I am a knight of chivalry in Christendom, and that only comes back to one area, and that comes back to Arthur.
It was sort of the Lord of the Rings of its day, no pun intended.
But well, Lord of the Rings was literally Tolkien was a huge Arthurian nut.
Uh-huh.
Most most of the stuff that he got for like things like Gondor and Rohan and everything, they all came from these old stories of Arthur.
Yeah, except his is more of a quest to get rid of the anti-Grail. You know.
Like to a degree, like it all depends. Like when you're looking at stuff like the Silmarillion, it's freaking insane how much he draws from Arthur.
Okay.
Because like yeah, the One Ring does kind of feel like the anti-Grail. Like that's like it's literally rather than everyone is trying to figure out a way to get a hold of it, it's like the whole plot is we need to get this thing destroyed. And the answer was very easy. It was Tom Bombadil, but Tom Bombadil just didn't give a shit.
You have a point there.
Tom Bombadil's like, I'll be here after everyone's dead anyway. I'm the most powerful thing in existence.
I think I can start a huge controversy with just the word eagles. But anyway, I have a question about the stump.
Hey, you can't bring the eagles in on everything. It just becomes a overused plot device at that point.
And Michael, don't you think it's no coincidence also that as the little fiefdoms, because as you aptly pointed out, they weren't the countries as we know them now. We had Robert of Toulouse and Godfrey of I forget which Boleyn, right? So it wasn't they had these fiefdoms and they were constantly warring and whatnot, and it was the goal of the popes to kind of bring during this time period to bring Christendom together and even introduce that idea of
yes, correct.
So to do that, not only did you have the Crusades, but you also have the accompanying stories and artwork, and I think the Arthurian legend proved to be a powerful tool in that arsenal.
100%, because that was always something that you would hear debated. But like people would try and claim that Arthur is being of them. Like very similar to. I don't think I've talked about it on here, but I have talked about it on some other streams I've been on. So if you've seen me talk about this, you've seen it. But like the version of the Iliad that we have is only one version of the Iliad. It used to be that when you were passing this around at festivals and everything, they would change up the birthplaces of all of the big heroes.
Yeah.
So like from the main translation that we use is from Thea, but what like during one festival he could have been from Athens, or he could have been from Sparta, or he could have been from Mycenae, and like vice versa with everything else. Like we've kind of narrowed it down to these big things because it makes more sense for Agamemnon to be the king of Mycenae if he was, the big warlord supreme of the army. He's got the most powerful and prosperous army out of all of them. It makes sense that he'd be the war chief. And so like we kind of went with this particular version. But I just saw Shane Burgess's comment in the thing, rustic aquatic bent lobbing scimitars. That's no way to create a basis for government. Agreed.
Oh, I just got it. That I heard you say it out loud. Oh. Okay,
no,
so
I am aware, Shane. I responded in kind. because that's literally what the peasant says. That's no basis for if some watery bit threw a scimitar at me and I claimed that made me king, they'd throw me in a loony bin. But anyways.
That's right. I don't know Holy Grail like you guys do.
Oh, I have seen that. That doesn't even come from a love of Arthur. Monty Python's Search for the Holy Grail is one of the greatest comedy classics of all time. I don't even know how many times I've watched that film. The fact that it's Arthurian is just a plus.
It's an African or European swallow.
What, I don't know.
Okay,
My
okay.
liege, how
I've
did
been
you
wanting to get around to this question for a bit. So, what? Wait, in the system of government or help? Help! I'm being repressed. Scene. Oh, yeah.
Those are all part of the same bit.
I've been wanting to get around to this question for a bit, even though I think it's controversial between Arthurian scholars or whatnot. But what is? And I think there's a lot of people who try to put too much realism into these stories now. So, what is the deal with the tree stump versus a table?
Just people being like, look, everyone wants to try and make everything about Arthur real. The fact of the matter is that the first mention of the fucking round table doesn't even come about until 1000s. All right? We're talking 2 to 3 centuries after the first record of Arthur. Trying to make this tree stump or round table, it doesn't fucking matter. Like it's really the fact that we have, because I've seen, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I've seen people trying to argue this shit. It's inconsequential. The point of the round was to create a method of which the knights could meet and discuss their grievances, issue challenges to one another, and tell their adventures at court. That is the only it to serve as a symbol of unity through the kingdom. Those are the points of the round table. It doesn't fucking matter if it's a tree stump. It doesn't matter if it's an actual table, round table. It doesn't even matter if it's a square. The fact of the matter is, the table fucking exists as a device, a literary device for the story.
Mm-hmm. All right, now I'm starting to put 2 and 2 together for things that don't go together at all. But it's like a false cognate when you're translating languages. 2 words that look like they're etymologically related, but they aren't. Poland, Robert's Rules of Order. Do they have any root in where did that stuff come from? Because I'm hearing, bringing the round table into these stories is you have these knights or these barons really who who could go into battle as knights, and they're accustomed to fighting out their little fiefdoms in reality, but in the analogous world of Arthur, they're brought to a table for diplomacy instead. And I'm starting to think with the Christendom influence there's a lot of shifting in the culture, leading to things like the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, and Robert's Rules of Order. I'm sort of piecing threads of that together in my head, but those joinings might not be real at all. I mean, seeing a commonality doesn't mean there's any causality. So, what do you think, Poland? Where did this stuff come from? I'm ignorant.
Are you saying did Robert's Rules of Order come from the round table?
No, cultural influence-wise, from Arthurian legend and.
I mean, they very well might have been inspired by it, but they were an invention of a much later time. But I will say that, much later, a few hundred years, when you actually had the idea of parliaments and whatnot. But what I will say is that with the signing of the Magna Carta, you did have nobles who were advocating for themselves and going to the king and saying, this is the deal. Because at the time, the kings were not as powerful as we would come to know them in later times. Kind of these divine monarchs, right? That have these vast empires. Mm-hmm. Like I said, that most of these kingdoms were still kind of fledgling during this time period. So you were able to actually leverage them. So you had all the nobles coming to a king and asking him to basically compel him to sign something and have a parlay over this. That was much more reasonable then. And it could have been influenced by this idea of you have your council, you need to treat them with some amount of respect and decorum.
And to further on to that point that Poland makes, just to kind of cement this, even within Arthurian myth, you have knights of the round table that are kings.
Mm-hmm.
You have King Pellinor, King Lot. Um, Generally, Lot is more of an antagonist, but he is technically listed as a knight of the round. You have these people who are kings of these minor fiefdoms in England, and then you have King Arthur, who is the heir of the warlord apparent, who had conquered all those kingdoms in conquest, or that other kingdoms had submitted to.
Yeah, and I hope I wasn't clear earlier. I know I'm making false connections. That's the term I was looking for, false connections. But I am often curious about the influence on real world culture that our literature has, even if it's something historical. Yeah,
Oh, it definitely does. Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
they're circular. One creates the next. Life imitates art, imitates life.
Well, and you have to keep in mind, to your point, Blue, we create a lot of these things as like as a point for us to aspire to, right? So we create this standard, even though it may not exist in the real world, so we can say, I want to be more like Galahad or King Arthur or Saint Augustine or whoever it may be. We have these paragons that exist in our culture, so we can look to that and say, I'm aiming for that, even though I may never reach it. So they do definitely feed into each other, and a lot of them are done by design to do that, to give us that target. There we go. To give us that
Yeah.
target to aim for. And even though it may be completely fictional, like let's say there was never anyone named King Arthur, or whoever, maybe there was never even a person it was roughly based off of, it still serves as something that has affected the course of European history because of it's inspired people to do, be it leaders or knights or individual nobles, and those ideals that it inspired and really enshrined in a lot of ways, and maybe reinforced even from the Christian influences.
100%. I don't think if I could put it any better than what Poland has. These stories. We talked about Arthur in the first episode and the historic man behind the myth. And we are so beyond what those initial records were. Because all we had, if you recall, initially, there was not even a king, a chief of armies, a warlord.
Mm-hmm. Like a head of several phalanx or just a platoon.
That helped, was instrumental in fending off a barbarian invasion in England during the fall of the
Wait, during the fall of the what?
the Roman Empire.
Oh, thank you.
And that's all we had initially. Now look at Arthur. He has a name that may or may not have come from that Latin Arturius. He has an entire structure of beliefs and heroic traits that are carried on through his knights and spread throughout like the idea of Camelot is practically the idea of utopia, of the perfect rule, or I should fix that, the just rule.
Oh, okay.
Because Camelot, I think that there's this misconception with Camelot that it was a perfect utopia. It's not, but it was still this unattainable thing because it was a fair rule where everyone received justice. Justice was the arm of Arthur, and he would hear the cases. He would and rule them justly. Not everyone didn't always get what they wanted. Nobody was always in prosperity. Famines and everything still happened, but they were attended to by a just king who cared for his people, for himself.
That's sort of the servant king idea that we aspire to. Is our it's you serve your time in office, not and I hate this term. I don't know when it started, but referring to like when we change presidents, it's a transition of power, because power is now the focus rather than service.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like that's the whole thing. And that was why it was so important early on when they were establishing who Arthur was as the character, not necessarily as the man,
Uh-huh.
that he not be raised amongst the highest of the peerage. Like he still had to be in the nobility because that would be contrary to that would go contrary into the times.
Okay.
But they put him with the lowest level knight that they could, a man with very little land that had to work most of it himself, so that Arthur would understand and appreciate the value of hard work, would appreciate the value of food on your table, would appreciate the value of all of these things, so that when he became king, that perspective would beget empathy for his people. And that that just goes into everything that the Arthurian myth branches out in. So you have these knights that go out there, and they are extensions of Arthur by proxy. By being a knight of the round, by being one, like, or in some versions there's only 12 knights of the round table, so it's being one of the 12. You are extensions of the king and the king's justice. So like it's really just, again, it's not quite that utopia, but it's this unattainable idea that's just off in the distance.
And I can hear in that a lot of, he's not presented as a perfect savior, and I'm going that direction with this, just from what you said. But I hear the same thing of, what good ever comes out of Nazareth, with he had to start low so that everybody could see that he knew the everyday man's struggles, that kind of thing. Sort of.
Exactly.
So I hear the influence of Christendom on the myth. And I had a thought a little while ago. I wasn't sure when to bring it out. But it was, imagine if you were this guy who initially influenced Arthurian legend, and after you die, you're shown, oh yeah, remember when you commanded these armies during this stuff going on with Rome? Well, here's what people said about you, and then here's what it turned into, and then here's what it turned into even later, and that like it'd be kind of freaky and weird.
I just feel like, why is there so much sex and pointless combat? Like, like I don't get it. When did I become a king? But like, that is a very interesting point to think about, and it's very interesting to see how these stories evolve over time and what have you. And like, I do think that that's always an interesting thing to take somebody from history and showcase them how have that idea of how they would react to how the world sees them today.
Yeah.
Like, there are certain people where I'm fairly certain they just freaking knew they'd remember me as a bad. Like, I'm fairly certain if Alexander the Third of Macedon were shown how people view him today, he'd be like, "Yep, that's right, I'm badass," and that'd be the end of that discussion. But like, then you have ideas like the man, because we don't even know if his name really is Arthur or if it's Artorius or what. But to show whoever the truth behind what has evolved into this myth, that thing, and be like, this is what you became. I think that it would be this jarring thing where initially they'd be like, oh man, this is really weird. But then there'd also be that pride. The fact that you were the spark that lit this flame that has inspired some of the greatest people to have ever lived to do what they do.
And it wouldn't make any sense to him without all the steps it took to get to what we have today. A lot of steps. So, Poland, did you have any? I have a closer that I want to give because we're just over an hour, and that's fine. But we try to keep it under 90 for sure. Did you have any thoughts rattling around you want to toss in before I give my closer with something Shane Burgess said?
Go ahead.
I also have one thing to reveal before we forget.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do my closer, then we'll do your reveal.
Okay.
This is my rap name, but I never knew what it meant. What is this something else, Monty Python? What is this?
Bohemond, Prince of Toronto? That doesn't sound... I don't recognize it.
I don't get it either. But anyway, okay.
Got me.
I'll have to search for it later. So what's your big reveal if you need your camera?
Yeah. I'll screen share it here really quick, but don't reveal it just yet.
All right. You just tell me.
Okay. So as people know, I do comics and do that thing. And I'm a huge, as everyone knows, with the Arthurian nut tagline. I have been working for a while on a book that is kind of my love letter to Arthurian lore and the Japanese manga Berserk. And so what I have here is we're going to be revealing an upcoming series. I don't have a release date or anything. We will be releasing episodically on Webtoon is the plan for right now, because it's going to be a very big book and I want to be able to release it in its entirety when it's done. So we're going to build the audience and then make sure that we're able to fund it. It's publishing anyway. But so I present to you Errand of the Sable Knight. And this is our version of our protagonist, King Pellinor.
See, that S still looks like a D, and the first time you said it, man, I heard Aaron, the disabled knight.
It does not look like a D, Blue. You
Well, I mean,
are literally just
before.
saying that because you heard that. I said it very quickly, and I've got a little bit of a cold right now, so my voice is a little bit nasally. And so I said Errand of the Sable Knight, and freaking Blue heard Errand Disabled Knight. And I was like, no, that would be a very bad book.
I will not disclose what I heard when you said
Well, yeah, I think I've heard it before, and I'm like, who? The unstable what?
But anyways, this is our version of King Pellinor from who will be the protagonist of our book, Errand of the Sable Knight. If anyone is familiar with Arthurian lore in the chat, this will effectively serve as an epilogue to the tale of the questing beast, which is Pellinor's big story in Arthurian myth. And it's been fantastic to write. We will be doing some reveals on plot details and everything here in the coming months. But as a way to make up for the fact that we've been gone for 3 weeks, and a good deal of that is my fault.
I thought it was my fault. Okay.
It was because Blue tried to reach out to us around a week and a half ago to get us to do this episode. And I was like, oh, I've got like 6 shows that night. And like every single time Blue would reach out to me, I'd have like a show that I'd have to jump on because I'm still in promoting Elysian Fields. And I'm literally going to be hopping another one. But I wanted to reveal this as an apology for the delay on this episode, as a thank you for all of you guys that are continuing to show up, and as a thank you to my wonderful co-hosts here, giving them a first look at something we've got coming up with Nine Realms.
Cool. Thank you. Poland, before we depart into madness, anything else on your head? On your mind? Sorry.
I enjoyed being back with you guys and talking about this. Is a nice reprieve from other discussions. So, and I did want to say that I believe what Shane Burgess was talking about was one of the leaders of the First Crusade.
Oh, Prions.
Yes. Prince of Taranto. Yes.
Yes, indeed.
I went and looked it up. The name looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. But 1098 to 11111. Didn't have a long life, unfortunately.
Good for him. For back then, that's impressive. You lived a long life? How?
Yeah.
Give me your secrets.
Okay,
You
now I'm
lived-
trying to get this thing off my screen, but I don't know how. So, oh, there it is.
I'll take care of it.
Oh no, I meant the title thing. Well, cool. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out in Poland. I know you had some other stuff to do, but we at least saved the question for you about France and the First Crusade. So,
Well, just think of me as I came in at the 30-minute mark. Just think of me as like the second wind of the stream.
we needed it.
Oh, it was going terribly before you came in.
Yes, there was absolutely nothing discussed before you came on the stream.
Well, I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying. I was just a breath of fresh air momentarily, and then I got stale. So,
Cool. We got Lord Crackhead here, Shane Burgess. Dean was here earlier. That's nerd is the word, I think. And I don't want to leave anybody out. We had Dean, Shane, Lord Crackhead, and Darren just showed up. Darren,
Yeah.
it's good to see you. Maybe we'll see some of you tonight if I make it to Bancroft stream. But thanks you guys for jumping in. If there's any part of this show that you've enjoyed at all, and please hit the thumbs up. Then go ahead, tweet it out, share it with your friends. We'd appreciate that, just because sometimes people like parts of the show. So,
Yep.
just parts though. They don't like the actual entire show. Only parts.
yeah, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So, you guys all set to go?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're good over here.
All right, everybody, have a good night. Thanks for coming by.
Godspeed, everyone.
Adios.